I was working at McDonald's, like marketing and advertising and the whole lot. And on Jum'ah, I would take an hour break. I would get in the car, roll up my jeans, take off my shirt, put the thawb on, drive 15 minutes, give the khutbah at the local community center, and then come back, and then I'm back to McDonald's,
McDonald's, the brand guy.
That's exactly right. They asked me to stay on for a long-term deal. And at that same point, I got accepted into Medina University. It probably wasn't clear to me till my late 20s, maybe 30 years old. Mm-hmm. That's when it became clearer as to where I fit. But the amount of pain I went through to figure out where I fit and what my contribution is, it was very painful. I wasn't heavily involved in the Muslim community early on. We weren't necessarily religious. Generally speaking, it was more, Mariah Carey, Michael Jackson playing in the household than Abdul Basit. And a couple of things happened along the way that pretty much overnight turned our family from just a normal Lebanese Australian family to actually very conservative.
Before we begin the podcast, a quick message from our sponsor. If you're Muslim and you care about your money, download this right now, the Halal Money app. An incredibly well-designed and easy-to-use financial app that allows you to open an account, deposit money, and spend through a Visa debit card they give you to use in your everyday transactions, away from the hands of a bank that's reveling in interest and even using your money in haram places. Download it now. Let's get back to the podcast.
Today we are joined with a personal friend of mine, a brother from Sydney, Australia, Mohammed Zaud. He's a brand, content and marketing specialist and someone I would describe as Sydney Muslim community's biggest dreamer. He's a visionary, someone who's highly ambitious and someone who's been involved in multiple organizations. You may remember his face from Yaqeen's Double Take as the former podcast host. He's also worked at Al Jazeera for over 10 years, being the lead of digital content strategy. Mohammed Zaud, also someone who's worked across multiple organizations, including Islamic Relief, and more recently, Australia's Al-Awqaf organization, which is promising to be one of Australia's most revolutionary organizations in the Muslim community. Mohammed Zaud, a pleasure to have you here on this side of the podcast.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. Good to reconnect.
Alhamdulillah. Now, I've obviously known you ever since I entered into the Sydney Muslim community space. You were probably my first point of contact into the Muslim community or the professional side of the Muslim community. But that was a bit later in my life and obviously in your life. I want you to take us back to the very beginning. Talk to us about your childhood in the Muslim community of Sydney. Take us back.
Well, first of all, good to reconnect, yes. Kamal, and it's always good to see you in person. Mashallah, we're seeing you all around the world and watching you regularly. So Jazakallah khair for staying consistent, persistent. I remember sitting with you a good 10 years ago about your journey and where you're at, and I'm just so happy, alhamdulillah, that you remained consistent, and we're indebted to the work that you do. So Jazakallah khair.
Thank you.
I wasn't heavily involved in the Muslim community early on. I was raised in a relatively normal Lebanese, partly Syrian family. We weren't necessarily religious. My dad would bring a sheikh over every now and then to teach us. But generally speaking, it was more, Mariah Carey, Michael Jackson playing in the household than Abdul Basit. And so weren't really religious. And a couple of things happened along the way that pretty much overnight turned our family from just a normal Lebanese Australian family to relatively, actually very conservative, and also one that wants to contribute to wider society. So a couple of things happened. Happy to share those.
Yeah, no, definitely, because I describe you now as being like one of the Sydney Muslim community's biggest dreamers, but obviously it wasn't always like that. So give us the backstory. How did this happen? Like, what were the turning points in your life that made you take this trajectory?
Let me say this. So many people in my life pulled me in certain directions, and somehow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed me to so much different religions, different sects or ideologies within Islam. I was exposed to a lot of them. different career options, different pathways in life. I really got exposed to a lot from a young age. I'm the youngest in my family. And just by nature of being the youngest, you see your siblings doing things. And one of the things that happened that actually instigated us as a family becoming religious was my brother getting married. I have to share this story because it makes me emotional, okay? So I'm one of 7 kids. One of them passed away, Allah yarhamu, just before I was born, so 20 days before I was born. And so at the age of about 7, 8 years old, my brother, who was just normal, Lebanese Australian, was out with his friends at the age of 18, 19, and he came back and is adamant. And the thing you probably know about my family is we're pretty stubborn when we set our sights on something. We don't stop until we get it. And so he got to know a girl one night when he was out with his friends. He came back and he told my dad he met a girl. She had a non-Muslim name. And he just said that I want to get married. And my dad's like, no way. Like, okay. My dad, mashallah, like worked night and day. He would wake up 3 a.m. to go to the markets. He had a fruit shop. Very, very hard worker. Very hard worker. And we learned a lot from him. But he wouldn't have a bar of marrying. I remember when I was getting married, he's like, no, you have to get married from the village in Lebanon. Not Lebanese,
not just Lebanon.
Or not Arab.
Yeah.
And in the end, when I didn't want to get married from the village, he was okay with any Arab. So I got married to an Egyptian Australian, which was like a big taboo. So my brother at the time, which would have been 20 years earlier, gets to know this woman who apparently was Italian, but wasn't. Turned out she was Lebanese Australian, but from a different sect. She wasn't Sunni. Okay, and somehow he convinced my dad we're going to go visit the family. So naturally, because my dad still had the cultural kind of inclinations, said, okay, we'll go and ask for a hand formally. That's what Lebanese Australians do. So we went, 6 of us, with my parents to go and ask for this lady's hand. And we go to a different part of Sydney, they were the only Muslim family in the whole street or the whole area. We rock up. The first and only ever Christmas present I received in my life was from that family. It turns out they were Lebanese, but she had 11 siblings, all of which, or most of which, had married non-Muslims. Okay, so there was in that family, Jehovah's Witness, Catholic, Christian,
a complete melting pot.
It was incredible, incredible. So when I say like I was exposed to different, it was incredible. So my dad, just to be respectful, he went with her dad to the backyard to plan the next steps. And so 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever, they come back into the room and we're like, okay, so what are the wedding plans? And they both said, okay, we've decided that you guys can't get married. So it's like chalk and cheese, water and oil.
Doesn't mix.
It's just you've got a relatively conservative compared to this family, and then this family is all into kind of other backgrounds. Somehow my brother was persistent, and long story short, they get married. It turns out she did have a Muslim name after all. But about 5 years into their marriage, they had a child, and they decided we have to look into religion. Like, what are we going to teach our child? They named their son after my brother who passed away, Allah yarhamu. And they decide what is he going to learn? Well, how do we, are we this or are we that, or and they started having an identity crisis. So they called the sheikh that my dad had arranged to come to our house and teach us Arabic long time ago. And mind you, I couldn't speak any Arabic or read or write or anything. But and they go, can you come and show us like how to pray? So he comes and he has a conversation with them, and okay, fine, thank you very much. We now know what this is. They decide to go to Hajj and they had 4 kids at the time, right? When they come back, that's it. They're religious.
SubhanAllah.
Okay, my brother looked different. My sister-in-law put the scarf on. Like she went from, honestly, the way she looked, you could never tell she was Muslim. And now all of a sudden she's like the most conservative in our family, right? So they decide we're going to be religious. And again, my brother is very persistent. He's the most stubborn guy I know. That's the honest truth. So when he discovered this world of Islam, he's like, I need to tell the world. So he went and purchased 5 CD burners.
Ya Allah.
And he started burning The Purpose of Life, Khalid Yasin.
Ya Allah.
And he started burning Abdul Hakim Quick and Siraj Wahaj and all these old, OGs. And they started handing them out and giving Islamic bookstore at this mosque, that mosque, and just making da'wah. So our family, on the back of that, were introduced. So my sisters were introduced to other people to come and marry my sisters. So one of them married a staunch, conservative. Another one married someone who has a Sufi background. Okay, he was actually Syrian. His family was Syrian Christian, and he converted, and he lived in a garage when he was kicked out of his house for a few years, and he was introduced to our family. Another one of my siblings married into a family that was Shia, and so I'm sitting there, seeing this concoction. And so my brother and sister-in-law, they just keep at it and they keep at it. And all of a sudden, her 11 siblings start practicing Islam.
Allah.
And each one of those became Muslim. Their spouses became Muslim. The Catholic, the Jehovah's Witness, the Christian. It was unbelievable, unbelievable. So for me, it was just the exposure that I was like, okay, what am I? Am I this conservative, that conservative? My sisters are pulling me towards some version, of Sunni Islam. Another, it was a weird situation for a 10. Exactly right, for a 10, 11-year-old. And so they decide, khalas, we want to go. We loved Hajj. We want to go and live in Saudi. Okay, this was like, we're talking 20 years ago. And so they decide to start applying for jobs. My brother tells me he applied for 50 jobs. Okay, one of the jobs was a cleaner at Pizza Hut, just to get out and go and live in the promised land. And so they started teaching their kids a bit of Quran. She started learning, and they started teaching the kids. They started like learning how to read and memorizing. There was an application. My brother tells me there was an application form that was expired 5 years ago. A job that was expired 5 years ago at a wardrobes company. My brother had a wardrobes company. And somehow the owner called my brother and said, meet me in Dubai. Okay, I'm in Riyadh, but meet me in Dubai. Some famous Saudi guy, okay? I'm not going to mention his name, but may Allah reward him. He goes, if you really want to live in Saudi, I can make that work. Just come and work at my firm, the largest closets company in the Middle East. So they go there and they pause schooling for their kids and start focusing on Quran. That's it. They had Nasser, Rami, Aisha, Jamila, 10, 9, 8, 7, okay? All of them within 2.5 years memorized the whole Quran, okay? Driven by my sister-in-law, my brother. I somehow found myself at Medina University. I could tell you why. And when I was there, my brother's like, just take a flight to Riyadh. We're doing an ijaza little party. So I'm in his lounge room. It fits probably about 15 people. Very small, humble lounge room. Who's in the lounge room? Imam of the Haram, Adil al-Kalbani. Nasser al-Qatami. You know Nasser al-Qatami?
The adhan, the famous adhan.
Adhan and reciter, man. Reciter, like amazing. Muhammad al-Luhaydan. Abu Bakr al-Shatri flies from Jeddah to Riyadh for this. Akbar. And we're sitting there, and it's because they're giving the ijazah to my nieces and nephews.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it, man. I couldn't believe it. Like if he wasn't persistent with something that he really cared for, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just paved the way. So around that time, you asked me like, how did we become conservative and relatively religious? In year 8, 9, I was at a local public school. No one was giving khutbah. So we needed to pray Jum'ah. And I was learning from my brother and my sisters and whatever that, we actually had to pray. So I just got like a Friday khutbah book and started reading transliteration, didn't understand half the things I was saying. And we started praying Jum'ah and we started praying Dhuhr. And then I just really got into being able to give khutab. Like I started becoming really good at it. When I graduated from high school, I learned how to read Quran so that I can actually use it for khutab and in my prayer and everything. And then I started being pulled. You know, am I a local Moonsada? Am I a global? Am I calculations? Or, you know, do I follow this manhaj or this aqidah or this? It was a crisis. You know, it was a crisis for a better part of 5 or 10 years. Allahu A'lam. Anyhow, I was pulled by one of the local sheikhs saying, I was in Hajj, saying, dude, you know, you're pretty good at this, giving khutbahs. You should apply for Medina University. And at that time, I was working at McDonald's. Not
flipping
chips,
burgers.
Not flipping burgers.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong. Actually, there's something wrong with that. But I was working in the headquarters as a marketing brand. I was Mr. Happy Meals. I was doing Happy Meals. Like marketing and advertising and the whole lot. $300,000 TVCs. It was fantastic. And actually, that was my day job. And on Jum'ah, I would take an hour break. I would get in the car, roll up my jeans, take off my shirt, put the thobe on, drive 15 minutes. This was as I was driving, I would do this, give the khutbah at the local community center in Whoop Whoop, and then come back, and then I'm back to McDonald's.
McDonald's, the brand guy.
That's exactly right. So they asked me to stay on for a long-term deal. And at that same point, I got accepted into Medina University. Now, what was I going to do? I don't know. Honestly, I was still lost as to where I fit. I was being pulled in this direction. At one point, I wanted to become Prime Minister of Australia.
Oh, wow.
And I started asking for fatwas. Is this actually okay? Can I do this? That's another story. But and I ended up in Medina University. And I did a short Arabic course and head back, alhamdulillah. And so that's technically how we became relatively conservative and religious. And alhamdulillah.
What a journey. What a journey. And I feel like one of the biggest learnings I'll take from that is like, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to guide you, He will guide you in His own mysterious ways. But at the same time, He'll put you in positions of responsibility. Sometimes even if you don't want to be there or you never intended to be there, Allah will just put you there and make yourself useful to the Muslim Ummah. You know, given khutbahs, all right, that's going to be my space. But then from what I understood from your story, given that I know you, is that there was more than just giving khutbahs. You have to find your utmost potential to give back and to contribute to the Muslim community. So how did you work out who you were within the Muslim community?
Yeah, good point. As I said, Kamal, like I was pulled in many directions. And all of them are good, sincere directions. And they're all valid pathways. If you're sincere, I think they're all valid. Allahu A'lam. But how do you figure out where you fit? And it wasn't just at that point. It wasn't at that point. Like I'm now, you know, in my late 30s. It probably wasn't clear to me till my late 20s, maybe 30 years old. That's when it became clearer as to where I fit. But the amount of pain I went through to figure out where I fit
who am I
and what my contribution is, it was very painful, man, because every person I would ask for advice would pull me in the direction that they know. But that isn't necessarily the direction that's good for me. Okay. So a lot happened. You know, it wasn't just at that point where I was giving khutbahs or Medina University. I found myself at Islamic Relief, then Al Jazeera. And that opened the whole world for me. And so it wasn't just where do I fit in the Muslim community in Australia. Alhamdulillah, now that's crystal clear for me. But it took 35 years to figure that out.
Who am I?
And I you know, people that ask, I share with them the process that I had to go through. It was costly mentally, but it was costly financially as well. So I actually did a couple of serious courses to figure out a manhaj or a strategy to understand who am I and how I'm going to contribute and what I'm going to present on the Day of Judgment. That was a long, arduous, process.
So how do we?
And painful.
How do you explain it to someone who wants to find out his own space? Because I know you've rubbed shoulders with some of like the movers and shakers in the Muslim Ummah. Like I know Tariq Swaydan, someone who's, really carved out a space in leadership, gets Muslims to, espouse their true leadership qualities. Wada Khanfar, the former head of Al Jazeera. So talk us through the process.
Look, process in hindsight is, number one, you got to think in decades in terms of your contribution. So actually two things. You need to be comfortable in the skin that you have.
Yes.
And be true to what your skill set is. And so there's a process for that. I've done multiple courses. I did the Swaydan course in Turkey, and that was fantastic. And I met incredible people, and there was a very rigorous life planning process. Okay, there was a booklet, you can fill it out, then check with him, and look, it was good to start thinking of these things. But would I recommend it for everyone? It's difficult. It's a difficult process because it's a plan, not an overarching mission. I think there needs to be an answer as to what my mission is and how I'm going to contribute before you talk about the plan. And so step number one, be prepared to think in decades. So what's my contribution over 10, 20, 30 years? The Warren Buffett kind of example where share market is up and down, whatever, but in the end, so long as you're net positive. But you need to understand where you want to be long term. That's the general theme of my life. That is a process. I did that with Mohammed Faris. At the time when he was doing coaching, one-on-one coaching. I was in Beirut at the time during Al Jazeera. We were doing like a Arab Idol for content creators. And I was sitting in the, don't ask. How I ended up there. But I was on the call with him, and he went through another process, which was designing your life. Some guy from Stanford who used design principles, like how you design a product, and then someone else who is like a career coach, and they co-authored this book using design principles on someone's life. I found that a lot more useful because it separates your life into multiple identities, and then you work on those in parallel, and then those converge into an overarching mission. So designing your life was probably the most beneficial. That's one really important piece of work. The other one was identity. So I read a few books that really helped me articulate who I am. Okay. Yes, I'm a Muslim, of course. I'm also Australian. But this conversation has been done and had and finished by Europeans like 20, 30 years ago. So there's a book called To Be a European Muslim, which I found very useful, Tariq Ramadan. And also one called On Identity, which basically, to summarize the whole thing, is you can have multiple identities, and you need an overarching kind of vision. So it's not to be so rigid with defining exactly who you are, what you are on any given day. It's just, this is my overarching contribution in this life. And I can be comfortable that I am, several parallel identities. I'm,
for example,
okay, of course I'm 100%, I'm Muslim, and that's the underlying, underbelly and theme in my whole life. But I'm also, I have Lebanese background. I also come from a certain town in Lebanon. I come from a certain town in Sydney. I come from a certain cohort for university. I come from a certain industry in terms of my career. I'm passionate about this particular sport. And each one of those identities, so basically your identity is as unique as your thumbprint. Everyone there is no more than one Kamal. So I can't box you into this is who you are and this is how you're supposed to act. It sounds okay now, but to get to that point where, you know what, you can't define me in just one sentence or one headline, because that isn't a true reflection of who I am. I mean, that was actually pretty eye-opening. So I don't need to fit in a box, is my point.
There are multiple layers to who you are.
There's multiple layers.
You wear different hats at different times.
Exactly right.
And then the overarching mission.
So I did this process with Mohammed Faris, very useful. And where I landed was basically, I want to contribute to protecting Muslim identity in Western societies. That's it. Now, had I not done this process, I would have been, okay, I want to do this project.
Yeah.
And then God forbid the project falls over, then, I
Where
have an
am I?
existential
Yeah.
crisis.
Mhm.
Or I want to memorize this thing.
Mhm.
And, that's impractical because things change.
Yeah.
But an overarching North Star is what you need. And then, alhamdulillah, Allah chooses the vehicle.
Mhm.
Allah chooses the vehicle. One day the vehicle is this organization.
Mm-hmm.
Another day the vehicle is this contribution that you're doing. Allah put you in this place, that place. And so long as you're, again,
Committed.
you're headed, it's net positive.
Mhm.
You're looking at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you're headed in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
What the avenue is, that's Allah's plan. Or really, there's tawakkul, there's an element of tawakkul, and just figuring that out, Kamal, it just it relieves you, you
Mm-hmm. Yes.
know. Khalas, this is my intention, and Allah biyassir.
However I get there, whatever means I have on this road, this is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands, but I'm going to be committed to the road, to the mission, to the overarching end goal.
Rabb.
On saying that, you said your mission is definitely surrounding, protecting, preserving the Muslim identity in Western spaces. How did your time at Al Jazeera, 10 years, that's a significant portion of your life, how did that play out
So,
in this?
first of all, as I said, Allah chooses, He closes some doors, opens other doors. I got fired from a job in Sydney. After I came back from Medina University.
You got fired?
I got fired, man.
Why would they fire you?
Ask them. No, to be honest, they hated me. I hated them. That's the honest truth.
Yeah.
Okay, but also I came back from Medina University and went into a corporate role, and I was like a fish out of water. It was just different. It was very different. So Allah closed that door. But guess what happened? At that job, I had taken a week off. Subhanallah, I had taken a week off because I was hosting a guy called Waddah Khanfar in Sydney. So if I've got time, I'll just share.
Perfect.
So I was giving khutbah. Still, that was kind of the through line. I enjoy giving khutbahs, mainly for myself because I learn. It forces me to learn. So I was giving khutbah at Punchbowl Mosque, your local mosque, right? And there's maybe 200-300 people. Some guy rocks up to me and says, my brother works at Al Jazeera and the head of Al Jazeera is coming to Australia, is going to Melbourne for a PR conference, and he wants to come to Sydney just to visit. And I don't know anyone else. So would you be open to hosting him? I'm like, whatever, fine. I Googled it. I remember Al Jazeera from my parents and whatever. So I Googled his name and I realized, okay, Forbes #1 most influential Arab or something like that. It was like incredible. So he hit all the lists. So I'm like, yeah, fine. I call a relative of mine who was in the Labour Party, Australian Labour Party, saying, listen, there's this guy called Waddah Khanfar coming to Sydney. Are you open to meeting him? Because I need to fill his schedule. Like, what are we going to do? There's only so much kebabs that you could take him to. And so he goes, okay, I will. 2-3 days later, he calls me back saying, I'll meet him. And the Prime Minister wants to meet him as well.
Oh, wow.
And the Foreign Minister wants to meet him as well.
Wow.
And the Immigration Minister wants to meet him as well. So I'm like, you know what? I better take off a week from my work. So I took off that, the job I was fired at. And so I had the Honda Civic. You remember the Honda Civic?
Yeah.
And so we hired a Commodore, the Australian national icon, and I'm driving this guy around. So the first stop was Channel 10. We're in the green room, and he's being interviewed by Hamish McDonald, a journalist, on one of the shows, and we're sitting in the green room. This is the first time I'm actually exposed to like international, internationals, and this guy's not just any internet. Like he's the head of Al Jazeera, so his level of exposure. He interviewed Mandela. He was at the Iraq War, Afghan. He met Gaddafi. This guy's a larger than life character, right? So he looks at me and he says, Muhammad. I'm like, yes. Oh my God, I trembled. Tell me about life. And like that was the most philosophical question I've ever been asked in my life, So how do I answer that question? What do I say? And somehow I used every ounce of knowledge in the marketing space to answer that question and fluff my way through it. So I answered the question. I don't know what the answer was, but I answered. And I'm like, alhamdulillah, I passed. And then he looks at me and says, that's good. Now tell me about death. And so it was a series of tough questions. He asked me if this tree, when we're walking in a park, understands what we're saying. Then he asked me about the last book I read, the favorite verse, who your father is, all these, and basically for 7-8 days, I built a relationship with him. And it was almost like a job interview. So he's like, you're wasting your time here. Come to the Arab world. So about a year later, I was in London for Islamic Relief. And on my way back, they pulled me in to an interview. And 3 months into a junior marketing role, I became head of marketing. I think they needed someone in that role pretty urgently. I had a heartbeat, spoke a bit of Arabic. They put me in. And so again, the exposure. I was pulled, I didn't even know what Al Jazeera was, but somehow I ended up at Al Jazeera. SubhanAllah.
That time in Al Jazeera, how did it shape your mission?
Okay, so again, exposure. Being able to understand what the community needs, what the world needs.
The Arab world is very different to the Western world
exactly
as well.
Right.
The Muslim community there is very different to the Muslim
exactly
community.
Right. And so where do you contribute? You can contribute in the Arab world, you contribute in East London, you contribute in Michigan, or, where do you give yourself? And I actually held some serious positions, not just at Al Jazeera, but there were some parallel organizations that I started supporting just as a volunteer, and they were kind of think tanks and whatnot. And I started seeing this world of the Arab world. Was I comfortable? I was honestly a fish out of water. I had a very different way of being to the way the Arab world runs and operates. So I was generally, for 10 years, uncomfortable.
Or finding your feet.
It was incredible, man. Like, I loved the country. Qatar was beautiful. I loved the region. We traveled everywhere. But it was very different to how we were raised. You and I come up. Like in Australia, you want to set up one path. You have the freedom to set up one path. Alhamdulillah. You want to build a mosque. So long as you're compliant with the local regulations, you build a mosque. We were praying tahajjud once in a mosque. I'm not going to say in which country. In Ramadan. We were praying tahajjud in a mosque in Ramadan. And the next day I get a call from the Imam saying, I'm going to lose my livelihood on the back of your unsanctioned prayers in this mosque.
Wow.
So I didn't realize that in some of those countries, you don't have the right to
There's so
convene.
much red tape. Yes.
It's a good in the sense that the government controls who's preaching and who's teaching, and that's good because they've got standards. But there's no civil society. And here you're talking to someone who his whole life, his source of religiosity was contributing, was giving back. And so I was deprived of that for 10 years. So it was very clear for me that I needed to go home to a place where I can contribute. And that's why we came back. One of the major reasons, one was family, other one was nature. But the real main thing was we want to contribute. We want to move the lever on something. And it's hard to do that in countries where you have no right to convene. And so we have a right to convene here. We have a right to, alhamdulillah, you have an ID. So long as you follow,
not everything awaits government approval just to do something.
You just get on with it. You just get on with it. Alhamdulillah. So that was it was clearer for me.
Yes.
That where I can contribute and where I can move the dial is
in the Western world.
Is in the Western world. We talk about racism. Yes, there's probably racism everywhere, but I do feel it's actually a little bit easier here in the Western. There are glass ceilings, but they're relatively penetrable. Whereas in other countries, no, actually, it's pretty clear as to what the pecking order is.
Do you have any moments, I guess, through your time in Qatar or through your time in Al Jazeera that really defined who you are today? Like pinpointed moments that really shaped your vision?
What I would say is I was put in positions that were extremely uncomfortable. And whether I didn't know at the time what I wanted to do, but I knew what my boundaries were. So I was put onto projects that fundamentally opposed who I am.
Yes.
And it was those situations where, what am I doing here
Mm-hmm.
that helped me define those situations
Yeah.
and that identity. Some things I can mention, some things I
Yeah.
can't. But yeah, that's
Without getting into hot water.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can't really say.
Yeah. No, but that's pretty interesting to know. But like, don't you have to go into your discomfort zone in order to grow? Like, don't you have to venture into that zone sometimes in order to grow?
Look, in hindsight,
There's
alhamdulillah,
yeah.
alhamdulillah, ya Rab, it was those boundaries
Mhm.
that I witnessed that helped build a spine for me. It's
Mhm.
like when you're teaching someone how to drive.
Mhm.
If it's a freeway and there's no potholes, and they don't have to make any sharp turns,
Mhm.
they're going to learn how to drive one way.
Yeah.
It's only when there's potholes, it's only when there's a really sharp bend and there are crazy drivers on the road that you learn, how to protect yourself
Yeah.
and who you are.
How strong you truly are.
And that's
when
what I
you're
say to a lot of people who ask me, should I go into the mainstream or should I stay with Muslim community? Look, work on your
Yeah.
confidence and your identity, but go out because you're going to be learning things. And just make sure that you ground
Stick to your
yourself. You have
principles.
private worship, all those things that help ground you and protect you. But that's how you grow, and that's how you also identify your contribution.
I feel like just yesterday or over the weekend, the Muslim online world was taken aback by the actions of one sister in the space, in the corporate space, Ibtihal Abu Saad, I think her name is. Just someone who's made a name for themselves in the world of AI and engineering, but still unafraid to hold up her stance, hold up her principles. I feel like that was very inspiring for Muslims in this space as well.
100%.
Echoing off your point about standing by your principles.
100%. I mean, look, one thing I've learned, alhamdulillah, there are many paths to pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
And, many people will have random things that they can show on the day of judgment.
Yes.
So everyone has a different pathway.
Yes.
Okay? Everyone has a different pathway. Having said that, someone needs to answer the question, do I want to be the most effective in this pond? Or do I want to be effective in a much greater pond or a bigger pond? And you need to decide, where you want to play. But we need players in multiple ponds and in many, spheres.
Yes. Have you crossed paths with anyone that inspired you throughout your time, specifically in the Arab world, in the space of media, whereby you saw them as a source of inspiration? Because it's very easy, especially in the Western world, sometimes we write off the Arab world, for many of various reasons. And I feel like sometimes that is a bit unjustified. Have you witnessed any moments like sparks that you'd like to share with us?
For sure.
Yeah.
So Waddah was a critical part of the journey. And the reason I say that was, for once, I found someone who had the ability to merge multiple identities, who was top-tier journalist, great leader, and also very religious, very religious. And so we would spend the better part of 2 years at his house on Friday nights, where he would use us as guinea pigs with a book that he was writing, which was The First Spring, The Life of the Prophet ﷺ, as in the eyes of a journalist, which means you need to map the Islamic sources to the non-Islamic sources. So what happened in Badr, according to the non-Muslim sources at the same time. And you also need to assume that there's no wahi, there's no revelation, and that these decisions were made by the Prophet ﷺ. Now, all of these are assumptions just to see a different perspective of the Prophet ﷺ. So, that convergence of multiple identities was really, really critical, and seeing that, in someone was really important. The other thing I would say, the leadership course I did in Turkey, I was exposed to incredibly wealthy Muslims who were so sincere and so religious, and it was like, where do these people exist? There's an actual possibility that someone can be top in their game in either business or in leadership or in sport, entrepreneurship, and not miss a prayer in the masjid. or pray tahajjud. I remember I was sharing a dorm room in Medina University with a prince from Bahrain. He was a prince. Say the right surname. He was geared up to be Minister of Communications or Dawah, I think. It was, and endowments. And the guy, man, wealthy, very, very wealthy. He wouldn't miss one tahajjud. And so seeing what I saw in Qatar, seeing what I saw in Kuwait of people who are like uber religious but uber successful in Riyadh, what I was exposed to some of the amazingly sincere people there, it made me think that there is hope. You know, we all complain about the situation of the ummah, and rightly so, and we're all frustrated. But the light bulb moment for me was, you know what? Our community and our ummah has incredibly talented people who are incredibly sincere, who have all the resources, but they're missing somehow a model or a pathway to put those resources and intentions to use. That was incredible. And there were multiple organizations, networks, leadership camps, networking sessions where I started seeing, you know, the shining dots in the ummah. That some brilliant people, man. Brilliant people. And mashallah, you know, you've probably witnessed the same thing in your travels. Our ummah is filled of amazingly inspiring people who are so sincere. Probably don't miss a prayer in the mosque, don't miss tahajjud, are generous. You know, it's unbelievable. It was just about how do you get these people to collaborate on something that benefits our community?
Yeah. Wow. So definitely I feel you on that point. And I feel like these people, they could do with so much support, help, guidance that you've mentioned now, and even what you're working on here in Sydney. Talk to us about this Waqf project that you've got going on, and why is it so pivotal and instrumental for the Muslim community? And why would someone with such a sharp vision or mission pick up this as his vehicle?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So one of the things you're asked when you're creating a startup is if you had all the money in the world and money was not an issue, what would you be doing? And so that's kind of like it frees you from the money issue and the scarcity mindset, and allows you to think of what the community needs. So you're able to design a product that is actually needed without putting the limitations on yourself.
Yes.
So if we were to do the same thing in our community, what does the community need? If I was to plant a seed right now, knowing that I'm not going to see the rewards of that seed, but that my kids and grandkids are going to benefit from that seed. It's like when you plant the seed of a bamboo. For 4 years, we're watering, all of a sudden, 4 years of patience, you see a bamboo shoot on the other side of the room or other side of the backyard, and you're like, where did that come from? And you realize for 4 years that the bamboo was creating a network under the ground of roots. And then all of a sudden it's the fastest growing tree. And so I'm thinking to myself, if money was not an issue, can you imagine the incredible work that our community would be able to do? Alhamdulillah, we have mosques. Alhamdulillah, we have schools. But who is funding the gaps? Who is funding the advocacy for our community? Who's funding the widows who need halfway houses? Who's funding the refuge center for people like my brother-in-law who are kicked out of their home for becoming Muslim? Who's funding those aged care facilities that our community needs? Or the drug rehab facilities that our community needs? Or those research institutes that can help articulate and define and answer the existential questions that our kids are going to be facing? And so I realized there's a gap. Right now in the charity sector, much of the money goes to emergency relief, which alhamdulillah, I feel like people are, addul amana, like they are fulfilling the need as much as possible. But who is funding the projects that our kids are going to benefit from in 1 or 2 or 3 decades time. So along my journey, I came across this concept of waqf, which was foreign to me, man. I was born and raised in Sydney, didn't hear much about waqf or this concept of waqf. But the more I realized that this exists in our history, the more I wanted to revive it. And I came across a hadith of Umar radiallahu anhu, where he had a parcel of land in Khaybar. He said, Prophet ﷺ, this is my favorite land. This is my favorite land. And I want to give it to charity. I want to give it up. Fi sabilillah. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you want, it's better that you freeze it. You declare it as a waqf, an endowment. And the benefits, the ongoing benefits, go to the causes that you care about. This was the fundamental paradigm shift in the way, it's called in normal mainstream talk, structured giving. It was an incredible paradigm shift.
Perpetual giving.
Yeah, sustainable giving, but structured giving as well, like it's long-term thinking. So the Sahaba latched on, and Jabir radiallahu anhu says that there was not a single Sahabi who had the financial capability illa waqf, except that he established a waqf. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Ali radiallahu anhu, they declared their houses, that's what they had, a waqf.
And a waqf like literally means to stop, right?
To freeze.
To freeze, yeah.
So basically, in modern day terms, it's an endowment, which means your asset, your principal, I'm declaring this building a waqf, is for public benefit. Okay, that's what it is. In a Muslim country, literally, if you want to declare your house as a waqf, or your car as a waqf, or your pen as a waqf for public benefit, the title of the deed would change from your name to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obviously, you can't do that in a Western context, but we have all these, webs of trusts that you can build to protect the asset. And so the Sahaba latched on. And the most famous one was the one of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Maybe we've heard of the story, but for me, it was like, again, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So when the Sahaba migrated to Medina and there was a huge influx of people, they needed water. So the Prophet ﷺ identified a water source, Bi'r Aroma, and he said, whoever buys Bi'r Aroma, walahul Jannah. And basically he's guaranteed paradise. And so Uthman radiallahu anhu, relatively wealthy, he could have done anything. He could have gone and just done food packs. He could have done anything there and then. But what he did was he established a waqf, which was he purchased this. There's a story as to how he purchased it, which is a nice side story. You can read on our website. But for now, he purchased this thing. And over time, over 1400 years, this thing was protected. And it started growing. And the people looking after the waqf started protecting it and growing it, which is the role of a waqf supervisor. Nadhir al-Waqf, his job is to protect the asset and to grow the asset and to ensure the returns of the asset go to the cause that the donor had.
Wow.
So over years, 1400 years, what's the value of Uthman's waqf? 5 billion Saudi riyals.
Allahu Akbar.
5 billion Saudi riyals. Well, 1.2, 1.3 American, 2 billion Aussie. And over time, it got so rich that they purchased land next to the Haram, built 2 hotels. Now you can use booking.com or whatever you're going to use to book the hotel of Waqf of Uthman. And he has a bank account in his name. So 1400 years ago, he thought in decades, and now there's continuous ongoing charity protected in a proper mechanism, not a 2-year, 3-year sadaqah jariyah. No, this is a real sadaqah jariyah that's benefiting him in his grave.
Wow.
That's the incredible.
So he has like outlined causes that were dear 100%. To him, and they're funding those causes to this very day.
Exactly right.
So you're talking about like for the mu'tamirin, for people that are performing the pilgrimage, they'll have shelters for them. They would have services.
But you also it needs to be sustainable. So you can't just give everything for free. The returns can go for charitable causes, but basically your investment has to grow. That's the best practice waqf. Wow. So in a waqf deed, basically, let's just say you want to donate for whatever, let's example, $50,000. And me as a supervisor of the waqf, you say, I'm declaring this a waqf. Me as a supervisor will create a waqf deed. You have to write your intention. In a modern context, like Australian, society, you also identify who your next of kin is, or who you want to be the donor advisor after you pass away, to hold us to account. And that's the mechanism that we've created. So, what your intentions are, and then you hand over the asset. And our job is to grow it and to use those benefits and the investment returns onto the actual charitable causes that you care about. And that's the other really critical thing of a solid waqf system. It's not about building a huge asset base for our own projects. The way we're set up and the way a really good waqf system is set up is not to run its own projects. It's to empower the incredible work that already exists in our community. That's how we're set up. So our job isn't to go and create a new nursing home. It's to fund those amazing people in our community who are already on that trajectory, but just needs a funding source. That's how this.
And how
works.
are all these decisions made in terms of where money goes and how much money goes?
Incredible. Okay, so now you're kind of talking about our business processes. Alhamdulillah. Over the last year, I came across best practice community foundations in Australia. And I came across this concept of a public ancillary fund, which barely exists in our community, barely exists. And I wish I can take credit for it. I wish I could take credit. But I can't. Because this has been implemented for decades by mainstream organizations. It's a 1963 tax law that suggests money donated to a charity is invested and the returns go to the charitable cause that the donor had. That's the general gist of it. So I spoke to the guy who wrote the Public Ancillary Fund Handbook. I called him, I said, listen, I want to set this up for the Muslim community. He talked us through the process, here's the handbook. And I studied some of the other organizations that do it. And what I realized is there are three important parallel units for this to work. Number one, legal and compliance. Your core business, McDonald's core business is real estate and probably food and marketing.
Yeah.
The core business of a waqf supervisor is the protection of the asset. And so legal and compliance is number one. That it's not something you can outsource. If I'm launching the next Google, I can't outsource tech. That's the first thing that a VC tells you. Your core business has to be done in-house. So your in-house legal team is critical. That's the first stream. The second stream is investments. What do you invest in? Do you invest in assets, physical assets? Do you invest in gold? Do you invest in crypto? That's a complex situation. And I don't know how it is in the US or UK, but in the Muslim community in Sydney, our community is traumatized from failed investment schemes. Especially those that are tied to mosques, where all of a sudden, you don't get 50% return within 3 months. And so the way we've designed it is, which is best practice, to appoint third-party fund managers. We have an investment committee, alhamdulillah, of qualified people. They've appointed third-party fund managers, de-risked it with 3 of them. And then they do the investing, we kind of supervise. So the investment is the second stream. And the third one is the philanthropy. So once you've made money, philanthropy in a waqf system is not about going and opening a homeless shelter. Philanthropy in a waqf system is to identify who your service delivery partners are and partner with them and hold them to account. So let's say we just gave 2 grants of $25,000 each, okay? One to someone that does homeless work and one to someone who does poverty relief. Our job now is to identify the best organizations that are transparent, have high governance, high impact, and good reporting. Okay, identify who those are, get them to apply for the grants, sign the MOU, give them the money, and hold them to account on behalf of the donor. It's something called a donor advised fund. Which basically, you as a donor, Kamal, say to me, I care about orphans in Gaza. Okay, my job is to go and find the best program on your behalf and come back and report to you. That's where I exist. So basically 3 key things. You've got a committee on legal, committee on investments, and committee on philanthropy. And really, it's about building best practices in those 3 streams.
So I feel like this is a very instrumental part of the Muslim community. If this is successful and if this does gain its legs, and inshallah, from what we're seeing, it already is making moves. Alhamdulillah.
Can I just tell you on that, Kamal?
Yeah.
We put the business plan or the operational plan. And what I realized, I told you there are shining lights in our ummah, right? This thing is going to cost to run. Like no organization just kind of, bootstraps and just gets on with it. It's very hard. So I put just a very small deck saying this is the plan and this is the cost. This is the last 2 months. Are you ready? I get a call from someone saying here's $50,000. Okay, contribution to set this thing up. I get a call from overseas saying, I love what you're doing. Here's 250 American.
Allahu Akbar.
And then I get a call from Sydney, someone I know who I didn't realize like is wealthy, and says to me, how much is it going to cost? I said, $500,000. He said, send me the bank account.
Allahu Akbar.
And what I realized was there are incredibly shining lights in our ummah. There's beautiful money and beautiful resources owned by beautiful people, and they need a beautiful home.
Yes.
My job is to create a home for that money that is transparent and that is protected and that honors their legacy. One thing I would say, Kamal, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One of the new kind of frontiers, if you don't mind me using this, because I also play another role, which is in marketing, brand, and competition and business and whatnot. So sorry if I'm using the wrong terminology, but one of the areas that NGOs are working towards is bequests. So Harvard University made $7 billion in last year.
Just like gifts from people.
I mean, you'd think that it's from what's it called? Fees.
Yeah.
Student fees. Part of that is student fees. But the majority of it, 4 billion of the 7 billion, came from investment endowment returns. So people, they've invested the money over 100 years or so, and the returns is what their major dividends and cash flow is built on the back of. So, and the same thing with universities and hospitals and whatnot here. It's all about the endowments coming from bequests, from someone's leaving it. So what I realized was, I asked 10 people around me, do you have a will? And have you left a waqf in your will? And they're all telling me, like 9 out of 10 people say, I don't have a will. Why? Because it's the last thing you think about, even though it's an imperative in our community and in our religion. And it's a long process. Finding a lawyer, paying $600,000-$700,000. Some of them are, mashallah, some of the amazing lawyers in our community do it for much cheaper just to get people to do it.
$700,000.
$700.
Oh,
$700.
yeah.
Okay, maybe, I don't know. If you have a complex estate, but for a simple estate, which is a simple will, there was no mechanism or no easy mechanism. So we got a guy called Professor Munir Abdul Rauf, graduate from Medina University, High Court of South Africa in Cape Town. He's a professor in Islamic inheritance law. We got him with a barrister, put him together in a room from Sydney, and said, create for us a will template that we can scale. We got some amazing brothers to build the website, muslimwills.com.au. And from that process, we basically have people, and obviously we sneak in there. Would you like to leave something for a charity? You can leave it for Awqaf or someone else. That's no problem. About 30% leave for Awqaf. Others leave for other charities that exist. That's not a problem. Ahla wa sahla. But can you imagine if we have 5,000 Muslims leaving 50 grand in their will? That's $250 million going into the investment fund for our community. That's the goal. Yeah. And that's how we're building it. And so, alhamdulillah, we've had people come from the woodworks. A couple of weeks ago, I get a call from a lawyer saying, there's a sister. I Googled her. She didn't look, sound, feel, based on my online check, Islamic. But it turns out she is Muslim and she knows what the concept of waqf is from, her previous country that she lived in. And she left millions of dollars to charity, millions.
Wow.
And she left some to establish a waqf. And so what we do is we grab that money, we establish a waqf in their name, and then the investments grow over time, and the returns of the investments are traceable and trackable through the online portal that we built for families to build their own family waqf.
Wow. When you look at that, I feel like one of the biggest problems with Muslims in the West, primarily speaking, is the fear of losing out on wealth, the fear of not having an income, the fear of being deprived of employment. It strickens the Muslim community. Even many people, back to that sister in America who spoke out, everyone's saying she's not going to have a job ever again. Like, she might be super talented, but because she chose to speak truth to power, she's going to be deprived of a job, deprived of an income, deprived of employment. But when you have a waqf system, which is independent and has Muslim values at heart, Muslim interests in mind, we begin to empower these individuals.
100%.
We're allowed to speak out. We're allowed to have, for instance, an independent Muslim media channel that can speak up and not have to worry about getting its funding cut from the government because they're too pro-Palestine or they're too pro-Muslim.
And that's the issue.
Yeah.
And some people complain about the editorial values of Netflix. At the end of the day, they have their values and they grant money based on those values to production houses. So we have values, alhamdulillah, that are mainstream values, that are very much compatible with society, and we want to promote those values. And one way to do that is by supporting the great work that exists on the grassroots level in our community, and that's how you do it. Otherwise, what are you left with? You're left with a community that is so reliant on government grants. We don't want to be a burden for government. We don't want to be a burden for them. We want to be able to sustain our own organizations, charities, and work independent of external funding. We can do that. And actually, the Muslim community is very, very generous. And there's a lot of money. It's about organizing that money in a transparent way. That's what it is. Hundreds of millions of dollars. 2023, top 10 Muslim charities in Australia, $130 million was donated. You know that? $130 million. Imagine a portion of that went to an investment fund that then funded projects. That's basically that's our goal. That's our goal.
Jazakallah khairan, Akhi Muhammad Zaud, for taking us through your life journey and into your most recent project. Before we do close the podcast, one last question. We've spoken a lot about, identifying your identity, developing your skill set, finding your mission in life. The last question will be, what legacy do you want to leave behind? You have a plan for decades, but the truth is not all of us live for another decade. The time when it comes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows whatever time is written for us. What would you like to leave behind as your personal legacy for your family, for your children, and of course for the community?
My dua for myself, my wife, and for my kids, for as long as I can remember, has been Allahumma astaghdimna wa la tastabdilna. Oh Allah, make use of us and don't replace us. And so long as I am I am serving the greater good for our community, I'm content. I genuinely am. Having said that, I was in a board meeting recently for Awqaf Australia, and our Waqf supervisor, the Sheikh, basically said, if I did nothing else in my life than establish Awqaf Australia, then that is sufficient for me. So from where I stand, Awqaf and the concept of forever giving and forever legacies is a convergence of every single experience that I've had in my life, from finance experience by setting up a couple of funds, from politics experience just by nature of being at Al Jazeera, from leadership experiences by doing 100 courses in leadership, from charity experience. All that is converging from marketing and brand into Awqaf and the concept of Waqf. So I'm praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows me to see this through, and that decades from now, our great grandkids are benefiting from the fruits that we're planting the seeds for today.
Inshallah. What a legacy. I guess that's vision, that's mission, that's at the heart of this conversation. To all of our viewers back at home, we hope you have found benefit in this. We hope you have found the will to create a life mission, to have that legacy when you leave behind this earth. And inshallah, until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.